Hey, we could see more announcements today from Trump Tower as the president-elect moves full speed ahead in selecting his cabinet. Welcome to Happening Now. I'm John Scott.
Hi, everybody. I'm Jenna Lee, and Mr. Trump is also heading to the Heartland today, where he will visit Ohio State University in Columbus to meet with victims and first responders in that car and knife attack on that campus last week that's still being investigated as part of a terrorist attack. In the meantime, Mr. Trump is tapping Oklahoma Attorney General Scott Pruitt to lead the EPA. Pruitt is a critic of environmental regulations, but some say he's the right guy for the job. And retired Marine General John Kelly for Homeland Security Secretary is also another name we've heard in the last 24 hours. General Kelly lost his youngest son in combat in Afghanistan in 2010. He's also the third former member of the military's brass tapped to serve in the new administration. This evening, Mr. Trump heads to Des Moines, Iowa for another thank you tour rally after that state's governor just received a big appointment. And that's where we find Peter Doocy, who's live with the very latest for us now. Peter?
And, Jenna, the president-elect and Carrier officials have both said that last week's job-saving deal was good for about 1,000 positions that were going to be going to Mexico and now are going to stay in Indianapolis. That is a deal, obviously, that got a lot of positive attention last week for the incoming president, but the official who represents union workers at that Carrier plant, his name is Chuck Jones, came forward and he says he thinks that the 1,000 number is too high and that it's closer to 800. So he started spreading that around, that he thought the president-elect was inflating the statistics, and when the president-elect found out about it, he got on Twitter to say this, quote, Chuck Jones, who was president of United Steelworkers 1999, has done a terrible job representing workers. No wonder companies flee country. Mr. Trump, a few hours later, then wrote, if United Steelworkers 1999 was any good, they would have kept those jobs in Indiana. Spend more time working, less time talking, reduce dues. I did speak on the phone with Mr. Jones just after the Trump deal was announced last week, and he was singing a completely different tune. At the time, he was very pleased, especially because he said small businesses and schools near where these factory workers lived would have been in trouble if hundreds of people all lost their jobs at the same time. But then he said he didn't have to worry about it. Of course, that was then. This is now. While all that's going on, the search for a Secretary of State continues. We just got word a few minutes ago that Alan Mulally, the former CEO of Ford and Boeing, is going to be considered as top diplomat. And retired Admiral James Stavridis is traveling to Trump Tower today, just a few months after being vetted as a possible running mate for Hillary Clinton. A few hours from right now as well, Mr. Trump is going to travel to Columbus, Ohio. He's going to meet with victims and first responders of last week's stabbing attack on campus. And then the big event tonight is going to be Mr. Trump's return to Hy-Vee Hall here in Des Moines. He had a rally here this summer as a candidate where he asked Iowans to vote for him. And he's coming back tonight as the president-elect to thank them for voting for him, putting him in power. And he is expected to appear with America's longest-serving governor, Iowa's own Terry Branstad, who is soon to be the nominee for U.S. Ambassador to China. Jenna.
All coming together. Peter, thank you very much.
For more on this, let's bring in Karl Rove, former senior advisor and deputy chief of staff to President George W. Bush, also a Fox News contributor. You've heard the criticism out there that Donald Trump is leaning too much on ex-military leaders when he's assembling his cabinet. He's announced 3 names so far. And if you include the name of General David Petraeus, who is also in the mix at possible Secretary of State position, there could be more high-ranking former military leaders in the White House. What do you think about that, Karl?
Well, I understand the concern about the Department of Defense. And since the creation of that post just after World War II, the requirement has been that no former military flag officer can command the Department of Defense unless they've been out for more than 7 years or have received special permission from Congress, which was granted once before, asked for once and granted once. But stepping back for just a minute, when did we get to be a country where military service was a disqualification for public service and service in the president's cabinet?
Precisely.
I'm a fan of William McKinley. He had a cabinet of 8 men. 3 of them had served in the military. Richard Nixon had a cabinet of 12. 7 of them had served in the military. The Secretary of State, the Labor Secretary, the Transportation Secretary, the AG, Mel Laird at the Department of Defense, HEW, the Postmaster General. All of them had served in the military, and many of them had been high-ranking officers, and many of them were decorated war heroes. So when did we get to a point where the Homeland Security could not be somebody who's in the military, that the National Security Advisor should not be somebody from the military? I don't remember these objections, for example, when Brent Scowcroft was named as George H.W. Bush's National Security Advisor, and he did an exemplary job. And then President Obama named General Jim Jones. Didn't last very long, but I don't remember criticism of him that we shouldn't be naming a military flag officer, somebody from the military, to the National Security Advisor's post.
When you when you stuff your cabinet full of lawyers, nobody seems to complain generally that there are too many legal types. And when you look at Congress, I don't know what the numbers are. I probably should have researched it, but the number of lawyers serving in Congress is way disproportionate to the lawyer population in general.
Right. And look, this may be the fact that we haven't had so many people from the military serving in the cabinet may be a result of the adoption of the all-volunteer military in the 1970s. But I think it is exemplary. I love the fact that we have serving in Congress today an increasing number of Iraq and Afghan war veterans. I think that is good for the country. These are people who have learned in a very personal way the cost of service and the nature of American leadership abroad, and I think it's valuable for us to do so. I see General Kelly is terrific. Head of the Southern Command. He's had to deal with a lot of these issues of hemispheric migration. He's had to deal with drugs. He's had to deal with border control. He's well prepared for this job. And look, Donald Trump had a great group to pick from. He looked also at Congressman McCall, Mike McCall, a friend of mine from Texas, who was the chairman of the Homeland Security Committee, well versed in these issues. But Kelly's terrific, and we shouldn't be holding it against him that he served in the military. We should be cheering the fact that people who have served our country so well and so ably in the military are willing now to take on civilian responsibilities.
And General Kelly lost a son in combat in Afghanistan.
Yeah.
One of the criticisms seems to be that because Donald Trump is choosing so many ex-military members for his cabinet, that there's going to be this drumbeat for war all the time. There's nobody, nobody who hates war more, really, than those who have fought it.
Right. And look, let's put this in perspective. The cabinet now, depending on how you define it, whether you include the UN ambassador, the EP administrator, the U.S. trade rep, we're talking about 15 or 16 members, and two are flag officers, the designated defense secretary and the possible Homeland Security secretary. This is much to do about nothing, and revved up by people who some of whom this may be a discomfort with the military, and some it may be an animus towards the military. But at minimum, it is much to do about nothing, in my opinion.
What about the EPA? He has tapped Scott Pruitt, the Attorney General of Oklahoma, a guy who is suing the EPA on behalf of his state, to run that agency. Give us your take on that.
Yeah. Well, first of all, full disclosure, I know Scott. He's a terrific guy. He was a great Attorney General for Oklahoma, and I think this is a terrific pick because in recent years, the Environmental Protection Agency has gotten away from the idea of considering the costs of its regulation as opposed to its benefits. That is to say, all they've been concerned about is, oh, we're going to do this nice-sounding thing without any regard to the cost to our economy and our society. Look, Scott Pruitt cares about the environment. He's from Oklahoma. Beautiful land. You cannot be a statewide official in Oklahoma and say we're going to despoil this beautiful land of Oklahoma. He cares about the quality of our water, our air, and our land. But he also cares about having a growing dynamic economy because only a wealthy economy can afford to improve its environment, as we've done in this country. And so what he wants to do is rebalance it so that the regulations that are laid out at the Environmental Protection Agency actually have lots more benefits than just costs. And we have too many attempts to grab power at the Environmental Protection Agency is attempting to regulate every wet piece of land in America. Under the waters of the U.S., the federal government is attempting to step in and regulate as an interstate waterway, that wet patch on your farm or that creek that runs through your ranch. And this could be just extraordinarily bad for our country and unnecessary. And Scott Pruitt is a practical conservative, who will look at a constitutionalist, who will look at this and say, does the government have the power to do this? And if we do this, what is the best way to do it so that we have lots more benefit than we have cost to that regulation?
I have farming friends who are just aghast at some of the things that the EPA has tried to do to them over the past year.
As well they should be. As well they should be.
Karl Rove, good to have you on. Thanks.
Thank you, John. Merry Christmas.
A busy day on Capitol Hill with the House expected to vote on funding the government after this week, while Minority Leader Harry Reid says goodbye to the Senate. He's retiring after 30 years and more than a decade as the Democratic leader. He has some words to share on all of that. Our chief congressional correspondent, Mike Emanuel, is familiar with them and familiar, of course, with Senator Reid, and he's joining us live at the Capitol. Hi, Mike.
Well, hi, Jenna. Yeah, first, lawmakers must pass what's known as a continuing resolution with the government due to run out of money tomorrow night. The package they're considering would keep the government up and running through next April 28th. It would provide $10.1 billion for what are called overseas contingency operations, money to fight terrorism, ISIS, and more, $4.1 billion for natural disaster relief, including Hurricane Matthew, and $170 million to deal with the contaminated drinking water problem. The House will vote first early this afternoon, and we do not expect problems there. It should have the votes to pass, and then they send it to the Senate. There, Democrats Joe Manchin of West Virginia and Sherrod Brown of Ohio are fighting one component. This package would provide 4 months of benefits for retired coal miners, but Manchin and Brown want a long-term deal. The House Democratic leader mentioned the issue a short time ago.
Democrats come to the floor today to urge Republicans to express their concern for their constituents in the fossil fuel industry, to do justice to them for the service they have provided, for the benefits, pension and health-wise, that they are entitled to.
We are also coming to the end of the Harry Reid era here on Capitol Hill, who has served in Congress for 30 years, as Senate Democratic leader for 12 years. Today, the Senate Majority Leader paid tribute to Reid.
It's clear that Harry and I have two very different worldviews, two different ways of doing things, and two different sets of legislative priorities. But through the years, we've come to understand some things about one another. And we've endeavored to keep our disagreements professional rather than personal.
Expect plenty more tributes throughout the day. Reid's last day is not entirely clear. It could be tomorrow, or if Senators Manchin and Brown want to hold things up a bit, we could be heading for a weekend session. Jenna?
Mike, I know you're familiar with the weekend sessions as well. We'll be watching. Thank you very much.
Let's get the latest from Fox Business Network's Nicole Petalides live from the floor of the New York Stock Exchange. Happy folks down there, huh, Nicole?
Oh, no doubt. I mean, happy folks across America. 401ks, IRAs continue to move higher. And we will say record. I don't mean a 52-week record or record since the financial crisis. We're talking lifetime records. So we're seeing the highest levels ever. In fact, the Dow is less than 500 points away from Dow 20,000. We've seen this Trump rally since he was elected into office in early November, and everything has taken off since. Let's break it down for you. I noted that the Dow Jones Industrial Average, you see it 19,549. That's where it closed yesterday. Almost down 20,000. It's gained almost 7% since Trump was elected. S&P almost 5%. NASDAQ, almost 4%. These are through yesterday's close, and we're gaining more today, slightly. That's worth noting. We've seen financials. We've seen industrials and energy higher. Goldman Sachs up 30%. These are in people's 401ks and IRAs and portfolios and mutual funds. JP Morgan, 20%. Travelers, 10%. American Express, 11%. So why is this happening? And will it likely continue? And that's the question everybody wants to know. Trump, well, he's all about U.S. jobs. More U.S. jobs. Don't let him leave from here. That's number one. Tax cuts, corporate taxes, individual taxes, less regulation on those banks. And as the interest rates go higher, that's good for the banks as well. Infrastructure spending, probably $1 trillion. Bridges, tunnels, roads, the like. That means jobs. That means spending. GDP growth and the economy will continue to boom. So when you ask on Wall Street, do you think this is a temporary bump? And while there could be some caveats, the truth of the matter is most people think that in the long term, these plans, if they go through, will continue to help to give this market a boost. And it doesn't quit here. for right now. And then you have the Santa Claus rally, right? That often happens at the end of the year into the new year. So we'll take it, whatever it is. I think people are bullish on Wall Street, at least for right now. And we're setting another record here again. And I don't mind saying it over and over again. Maybe I'll see you tomorrow and say it again.
Yeah, well, it could happen the way things are going. Things are on a roll there. Nicole Petalides, thank you.
Thanks, John.
We're going to repeal and absolutely repeal and replace Obamacare.
Repeal and replace Obamacare.
Repeal and replace Obamacare. Repeal and replace Obamacare with something so much better.
So we've heard it a few times, right? Repeal and replace, a familiar refrain heard all through the presidential campaign. But Republican lawmakers are coming to grips with how difficult it will be to unravel the sprawling health care legislation and are considering a repeal and delay approach instead. Perhaps. We'll see right now. David Gutfreund is the former deputy staff secretary to President Clinton. Ed Rollins was the director of President Reagan's reelection campaign, principal White House advisor to President Reagan, and he's also a Fox News political analyst. Ed, let me start with you. Let's just talk about the politics of this just as we look ahead to the new year. How much time do Republicans have to get something together if indeed they have another option to Obamacare? How quickly does it need to be up and running for the public?
I think it needs to be up and running pretty quickly. I think it's a very complicated issue, and obviously they can repeal it quickly. They've already done that a number of times. But the replacement part of it is where the difficulty is. And whatever we do at this point in time, we'd like to do with some bipartisan support. We'd like to make sure that the system that you end up with here is something that people will be satisfied. Nobody is satisfied right now with Obamacare. The costs are record high, that you don't get to keep your doctors, hospitals. The original plan didn't bring anything to bring the cost down. And I think to a certain extent, the cost of small businesses, the cost of big businesses, the cost for insurance is enormous.
David, your thoughts?
Well, I think that Ed said something very important here. He's hoping that Democrats vote with Republicans on some of this, and there's a real political reason for that. When he was chief of staff, Rahm Emanuel warned President Obama, if we pass this thing, we get blamed for anything and everything that goes wrong with someone's health care, and that is true for Republicans as well. Democrats are out of power now. So if Republicans touch it, they get blamed for somebody's insurance problem, somebody's doctor problem, whatever it is. The Republicans touch it, they own it. And that's why I think Ed saying, I'm hoping that we get some Democratic votes is very wise. I think if I were in his seat, I would too.
David, would you say that was a mistake, though, looking back on it? Because Democrats went ahead without any sort of bipartisan support at all, not even one little Republican, sorry, not little, but, you know, in general, coming across the lines. Did that forever hurt the legislation?
I think what it meant was that, as I said, anything that went wrong, Republicans could just say, well, I didn't vote for it, it's not my problem. And the political problem Republicans have now is that 20 million people have gotten insurance as a result of Obamacare. What about them? You know, somebody I know and respect very well, his name is Chris Ruddy. He's the CEO of conservative site Newsmax. He wrote recently, President Obama won the argument that coverage was a problem. We have to cover people. Now Republicans have to answer how they would do it. And Mr. Ruddy suggests that maybe Medicaid is the way to look at that, which is filled with ironies. But the point is, 20 million people, one way or another, are going to point to Republicans and say, you took that away from me, or you fixed a problem. And I think it's the latter that Republicans want. It's just very complicated.
And just to underscore, Medicaid, the expansion of Medicaid has been huge under Obamacare. And that's why some are looking at it and saying, okay, Medicaid's expanded. Perhaps the Medicaid expansion stays because it has nothing to do with the private market. And at least it'll cover some of the people that were absorbed into it.
Except it's an enormous cost to states. And the reality is most of these states that took it because the federal government was going to pay for it for a 5-year period. I think the critical thing here is when to get one fix. We can't keep doing this every 2 years, every 4 years, every 6 years. So I would hope that they take the time, again, do whatever they have to do politically to repeal it, at least emotionally set that in play. But I think it needs to be carefully thought through that this is a plan that's going to be here for a long time, just as Medicare and Medicaid. Some minor adjustments that may need to be made, but this really is the major overhaul, and you've got to make sure it works. Got to make sure it works for doctors. You've got to make sure it works for hospitals. Got to make sure it works for the insurance companies. Got to make sure it works for the employers, and certainly most important of all is for the patients. And I think that's going to take time, and it needs to be done carefully and effectively and with bipartisan support.
Well, and the question is the timing again. We all have seen if you do get health insurance through your company or you were getting it through Obamacare as well, you had this open enrollment period. So we're all essentially actually signed up, if you have insurance, through the end of next year, David. But after that, there's a big concern. You know, next November, do we see something different? So is that really the timeline you're looking at? And where do you see Democrats joining Republicans in some of these efforts?
Well, first of all, let's be clear. Most of Americans always did and still do receive their health insurance through their employer. So we're talking about, as I said, not a majority of Americans who are impacted by these changes, but a significant number of them, and ironically, many Trump voters. I mean, a lot of the counties that went for Trump are places where Obamacare has resulted in increases in coverage. Now, as far as timing goes, I think that regardless of whether or not the Republicans in Congress put a long fuse on the sunsetting of certain provisions, like if they say, don't worry, nothing's going to happen for 3 years, I still go back to my original statement. You touch it, you own it. Anything that happens in health care at that point could be blamed on some action in Congress. I think Democrats are gettable for Republicans if the coverage element is maintained. That is, if you say, all right, the people who are covered today will remain covered, we're not going to pull the rug out from under them, a lot of Democrats would be willing to work with you on making the program better.
I'd weigh in on that, because there's having coverage and then there's liking coverage, the coverage that you're getting. And the difference between that seems to be at the core of the issue about what to do with health care right now.
Well, equally as important, the problem always has been health care. When you have young 25, 30-year-old people, adults who are not sick, and they don't want to spend the enormous amount of money it costs for health insurance. They'd rather put their money somewhere else. So by the mandates and other things, we've tried to force people into a system that they're not very happy with. So somehow you've got to basically, and again, I think it's not just the bipartisan support, it's bringing all elements of the health provider system into the play. And each of them now has had a system in play for 4 or 5 years. They know what doesn't work. They know what does work. And I think at the point in time of redrawing another bill, and I don't care whether it's a Republican bill or a Democrat bill, I mean, it's going to be a Republican bill, obviously, but I think with bipartisan support, it has to fix the health care problems for the long term, and that's got to be the goal.
Are you both optimistic? I mean, quickly, David, are you? I mean, are you optimistic? Ed, are you optimistic that this could be better, that next year at this time we might have something different?
It can be better. I'm convinced of that, and I think David would say the same. We now know what didn't work. We know what needs to be fixed, and I think that's the critical thing here.
David?
Henry Waxman, who chaired the Energy and Commerce Committee when this thing passed, said, never before have we passed something this complex and not gone back to fix it and make it better. I think Democrats would be anxious for that opportunity.
All right, well, we'll see. Thank you very much, David, Ed. Great to have you both. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Well, it's take two on a high-profile murder for hire trial after a Florida woman had her first conviction tossed out. Why prosecutors are now telling jurors to pay close attention to police recordings of the defendant and her former lover. What the defense is saying, our legal panel weighs in. Plus, talk about a hot night on the town. Why people are celebrating by hitting each other with burning broomsticks and lighting huge bonfires.
Welcome, everybody. Brand new hour of America's Newsroom. I'm Martha McCall.
And I'm Bill Hemmer. Maybe we could head up the APA.
I thought I said EPA. Does it sound like APA?
I'm waiting
the
for
Environmental Protection Agency.
I'm waiting for McCallum's name to be pulled. I keep waiting.
Very happy where I am.
Right on. Day for transition and travel. Mr. Trump heading out of town later today, flying first to Columbus, Ohio. He'll speak with the victims of the attack at Ohio State and then continues his thank you tour, holds a rally later tonight in Des Moines, Iowa, and we will see that live.
Mark Thiessen, a columnist for The Washington Post and a Fox News contributor. Mark, good morning to you. Good to see you here this morning. So let's talk a little bit about the picks that we've got right now. Let's get your take first on General Kelly in terms of Homeland Security. There were a number of people who would have liked that job, and we'll talk about that in a second. But first, your thoughts on him.
Well, he's a terrific pick, and there's been a lot of talk about how President-elect Trump is choosing a lot of generals. Well, in the case of Homeland Security, it's a great idea to put a general in charge because it reinforces the message that the battle against terror is a matter of war, not a matter of law enforcement. And putting a general in charge of protecting the homeland is smart, and Kelly's a perfect pick for it. Kelly, one of his principal missions is going to be securing the southern border. He was the head of U.S. Southern Command, which is the military command in charge of protecting our hemisphere, and he was when he in that job, he was sounding the alarm when very few people were listening about Iranian infiltration of South America, the infiltration of Hezbollah terrorists who could come into this country and infiltrate terrorists through our porous southern border. So he's going to put a big focus on that.
You know, when you look at the process and how this is all taking place, Kelly's name first surfaced in the Secretary of State search. And there's an interesting piece in the Wall Street Journal this morning about how these vetting processes go. First of all, they're very public. You walk through the lobby. Second of all, he grills these people, and he tries to sort of get them off their game a little bit. He wants to see how aggressive and how smart they are about their subject matter, right?
Oh, absolutely. And look, he had a lot of practice on The Apprentice and grilling potential employees. So, I mean, I think Donald Trump, one of his qualities, whether you're a supporter or an opponent of Donald Trump, one of his qualities certainly is picking and finding talent and picking talent. And he's doing a fantastic job. I mean, this is going to be one of the most conservative cabinets any president has ever put forward. If you think about, Jeff Sessions as Attorney General, Betsy DeVos, one of the nation's leading champions of school choice and education, Ben Carson at HUD, who is probably the first HUD secretary who's actually lived in an inner city, as opposed to talked about it from the ivory tower. And now you've got General Kelly, and you've got Scott Pruitt now at EPA, who's going to be a fantastic choice for EPA.
Yeah, in terms of
it's funny. You called it the APA. It's going to become the American Protection Agency under Scott Pruitt. So I think it actually should be the right name, APA, instead of EPA.
In terms of who didn't get picked, Homeland Security, one of the names that pops up is Rudy Giuliani, who did an amazing job with New York City after 9/11 and who may or may not still be in the mix for the State Department. Your thoughts on that?
Yeah, Rudy Giuliani was I'm a New Yorker, and I was in the Pentagon on September 11th. So Rudy Giuliani was he was a terrific mayor, and he was a terrific leader in the days after 9/11. So I would love to see him in some sort of senior position. He really put all of his chips on. It looks like he put all of his chips on Secretary of State. We'll see if that bet pays off or not. I think he would have been a great candidate for Homeland Security as well. So we'll see where he comes out on that.
Mike McCall was another name that was in there for Homeland Security, a member of Congress who's been very active in this as well. So it's clear that there's a lot of people that are in the mix, and that some of them, maybe are getting moved into different positions as they fall on the list of somebody that Donald Trump really, really likes and wants to find something for. Talk to us a little bit about Pruitt, because people who are concerned about the environment, some of them, feel that he is not the right guy for this. What do you think?
Well, Pruitt's concerned about the environment. I mean, we're all concerned about the environment, but Pruitt believes it's great having a state official in charge of the EPA, because Pruitt believes that the states were intended under the Constitution to be the principal regulators of the environment. People closest to the land should be making decisions about how the land and how the environment is taken care of. And so President Obama has been abusing the powers of the EPA to impose a radical environmental agenda on this country that is killing jobs and hurting the economy. And Pruitt's going to roll that back so we can have clean energy development. It's funny, the Sierra Club said, which is a left-wing environmental group, said that it's like putting an arsonist in charge of putting out fires. Well, with all respect, we need to light a fire on this economy, and the EPA has been pouring cold water on the economy, on energy development, and all these other things. And so that's exactly the kind of person we want at the EPA, someone who's going to have responsible energy production, who's going to protect the environment, defer to states, but also clear the way so we can create jobs and become energy independent, both for our national security and our economic security.
It's going to be a shakeup at that agency. There's no doubt about it. Mark Thiessen,
certainly is.
Thank you very much.
So now we know who Mr. Trump would like to keep America safe. He's tapping retired four-star General John Kelly for Homeland Security. National Security Correspondent Jennifer Griffin live at the Pentagon for more on that. So his selection marks the third general to be nominated in Trump's cabinet, Jennifer.
That's right, Bill. In fact, it seems that President-elect Donald Trump is assembling a band of brothers rather than a team of rivals, which was, of course, President Obama's model for his cabinet. 3 Marines, all close friends, will now be leading the Pentagon and Homeland Security. General Joe Dunford, now the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, is a longtime friend of General Kelly's. In fact, he delivered the news that Kelly's son, Second Lieutenant Robert M. Kelly, had been killed in Afghanistan 6 years ago, appearing at Kelly's front door wearing his full dress uniform as Assistant Marine Commandant. General Kelly said when he saw his old friend at the door, he knew immediately his son was dead. General Kelly is the highest-ranking military officer to have a child killed in combat. 4 days later, General Kelly delivered an emotional speech to the Semper Fi Society in St. Louis. He called out the fact that so few families serve and so few are protecting so many.
We are in a life and death struggle, but not our whole country. 1% of American families are touched by this war. That is a much smaller result of families who are given all.
That was just days after his son was killed. I remember sitting next to General Dunford and his wife Ellen at a dinner on Veterans Day in 2010, Bill. That morning, they had accompanied General Kelly and his wife to Dover to retrieve their son's remains. There is no underestimating the bond that these two Marines feel for each other.
My. Wow, that is remarkable. Why do you think General Kelly was picked for this job? What does he bring to it, Jennifer?
Well, many forget that he was Robert Gates' senior military advisor when he was defense secretary, and that was a time when the current DHS secretary, Jay Johnson, was general counsel here at the Pentagon. He has been advising Jay Johnson in recent months. In fact, he's been advising him. His last job before retiring was as head of U.S. Southern Command, responsible for Gitmo and border security, as well as assisting in drug interdiction. He's not afraid to speak his mind. Here's what he said, in fact, about the military being told to open all combat positions to women.
It will be the pressure for not probably the generals that are here now, but for the generals that are to come and admirals to lower standards, because that's the only way it'll work in the way that I hear some people, particularly agenda-driven people here in Washington or in the land, the way they want it to work.
Trump is assembling a group of generals who are not afraid to speak truth to power, Bill.
Jennifer, thank you. Fascinating life, and what a sacrifice he has made for our country. Jennifer Griffin, thank you very much there at the Pentagon.
Remarkable man. So President-elect Trump is taking his thank you tour to Iowa today, but before that, he will make a stop in Ohio for a much more somber occasion. He will meet with the victims from last week's attack at the Ohio State University. Matt Finn, live from the school's campus in Columbus. Matt, what is the scene there this morning as they wait for Mr. Trump?
Good morning, Martha. Well, people are still recovering here emotionally and physically on campus. A short while ago, we spoke to a professor in his home who was here on campus that day. He suffered a pretty substantial wound to his leg. So people, the emotions are still very raw here. Now, President-elect Donald Trump is expected to meet with victims and first responders here around 3 o'clock local time today. Ohio State University tells us Trump's team prepared the list of people he would like to meet with, and it's not confirmed if the officer, Alan Harushko, who took down the attacker, Abdul Artan, on November 28th, will be meeting with Trump, that officer being labeled a hero. Now, on November 28th, Abdul Artan, a Somali-born student, drove his car into a crowd here on the campus, then got out and started stabbing people with a knife, injuring 11 people total before that police officer took him out. Now, there was some controversy over Donald Trump's initial response on Twitter when he tweeted out, quote, ISIS is taking credit for the terrible stabbing attack at Ohio State University by a Somali refugee who should not have been in this country. Now, we can't confirm if ISIS did in fact have anything to do with this attack, but the student was at least legally here. Now, next up today, after this visit here at Ohio State University, Donald Trump will be heading to Iowa, where he will continue his Thank You America tour. Martha?
All right. Matt, thank you very much. Look forward to that later this afternoon.
Getting some breaking news right now. An earthquake off the coast of Northern California measured 6.8, centered well north of San Francisco. Ferndale, California is the town, we're told, the nearest town on the coast. So we're talking about 100, maybe 200 miles north of San Francisco. Just crossing the wires right now. Don't have a lot of information, but we'll keep an eye on it for it. It's coming up in a moment here.
And an escaped inmate sparking a massive manhunt. At least one officer reported injured, where police think the convict may be now.
Also, Mr. Trump now under fire for appointing another general to his administration. Is that the case? Is that the trend? General Jack Keane will react to all that. We'll get his take on what's happened so far.
And Democrats fighting back, accusing the GOP of a war on seniors, as the nomination of Tom Price for Health and Human Services Secretary raises new questions about the future of Medicare. Senator John Thune joins us next. Brewing on Capitol Hill over health care. Democrats accusing Republicans of waging a, quote, war on seniors and vowing to fight any GOP efforts to cut or privatize Medicare. Some Democrats also suggesting that Health Secretary nominee Tom Price may be in for a very tough confirmation hearing. Nancy Pelosi saying this: destroying Medicare and making seniors pay more is not what people voted for in November. We will do everything in our power, just as we did in 2006 when President Bush wanted to privatize Social Security. Senator John Thune is chairman of the Senate Republican Conference. Senator, good to have you here this morning. Welcome. Good to see you.
Martha.
So we're getting sort of signals in the tea leaves here about which of these nominees are likely to have fairly smooth sailing. General Mattis appears to be in that category, and you can tell me if you agree with that. But it looks like Tom Price may be in for a fight.
Well, I think the Democrats, they would love to slow down President-elect Trump's appointment of nominees and getting them confirmed into these positions. But we're going to move very quickly to confirm Tom Price and the other nominees that he's put forward. I think these are people that are very qualified for the positions they've been nominated for. Tom Price has enormous experience as a physician, also as a member of Congress who's been a leader on health care issues, and is ready to roll up his sleeves and get to work to try and repeal and replace Obamacare with something that works for the American people. So we're anxious to help him get into that role. The Democrats can try and throw roadblocks up, but because they changed the rules 2 years ago, he will be confirmed at 51 votes, and so that's going to happen.
And that was the rule change that Harry Reid himself came up with, which now is going to make it very difficult for Democrats to keep anybody off of Donald Trump's cabinet. Is that right?
That's correct, and I think they may rue the day that they did that, because...
And they were warned about it at the time, as I remember.
Well, we were, and we, at the time, obviously, they used the nuclear option. They broke the rules to change the rules, and so that they could get some of their nominees on the courts. But they also changed it for executive branch nominees, and those are the rules. The rules we're going to play by. It's going to be 51 votes, and that's going to make it a lot easier for us to get these people into their positions quickly.
So in terms of Tom Price and Medicare, is it truthful to say that he wants to eliminate the program, as is being said on some websites this morning?
No, I mean, there's just a lot of crazy talk out there, Martha, and I think people just need to accept and realize that there are a lot of people who are very concerned about the outcome of the election and want to muck things up as much as they can around here. And so there's a lot of just rhetoric out there that is completely unfounded, and I think people need to accept that for what it is. Tom Price is somebody who wants to make Obamacare, or wants to make a health care system work in this country, which means getting rid of Obamacare and moving to a new system that has more choices for parents, or I should say for patients, more flexibility for businesses, and hopefully more control for doctors and patients than what we have today. These ideas that are being proposed out there are just crazy, and I think they need to be treated as such.
Well, Donald Trump said on the campaign trail, I'm not going to cut Social Security, Medicare, or Medicaid, and that every other Republican is going to cut them. So if there are changes to be made, do you think that that can be worked out, given what he said when he was running for president?
Well, President-elect Trump has made statements on the campaign trail about some of these programs. Obviously, we all believe in Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid. They're safety net programs. People depend upon them. But like any government program, they can work better and more efficiently. And some of us happen to believe that we've got to reform our entitlement programs and make them sustainable, not just for people who depend upon them today, but for future generations of Americans. And so I hope we can get into a discussion, frankly, of how we can make that happen. But I think the reality is that starting out, the first thing out of the gate when we get back in January is a vote here in the Senate on a resolution to repeal Obamacare and to move toward replacing that in a step-by-step way with health care insurance solutions out there and coverage that really work for the American people. And we may have a discussion about entitlement reform at some point, but first out of the gate is going to be Obamacare repeal, and then the process of replacement, getting a new Supreme Court justice on the court, tax reform, getting the economy growing and expanding again. There are a whole range of things that we think are priorities, and at some point I hope we deal with the issue of entitlements.
You guys get a lot of rest over Christmas holidays
We're
and the
going to
break.
need that, yeah, that's right.
Because it's going to be pretty busy for you and for all of us who watch this process and report on it. Senator, thank you very much. Good to see you, sir.
Great to be with you.
If you saw the stock market this week, the Dow is on a tear, and Donald Trump has taken a hard line against some American companies looking to send jobs overseas. He's saying those companies will pay, literally. Is he right? And will Republicans in Congress get on board that idea?
$800 billion. Who's negotiating these deals?
Who's negotiating these deals? Oh, don't worry. It'll change. It'll change.
There was discussion yesterday about a refrigerator perhaps being responsible.
Some House Republicans now signaling a break from Donald Trump and his plan to tax U.S. companies that outsource jobs. It's something to watch. Fast Eddie Henry live in D.C. now. How you doing, buddy? Good morning to you. Not all Republicans are on board in what sense? Who are they? What's happening?
Well, because this tariff of 35% on companies that ship jobs overseas is basically a tax on these companies, obviously. And you have Republican leaders like Paul Ryan and Kevin McCarthy who say that obviously in the first 100 days and beyond, they want to work with this new president. But they also have heartburn at the idea of going after companies that already feel like they're overtaxed, overregulated. There's going to be regulatory relief. There may be tax relief as well. It's something Donald Trump has promised. But this seems to run against Republican orthodoxy, and you heard it yourself when you interviewed Kevin McCarthy, the House Majority Leader. Watch this.
There's many ways to going about doing it. In our process of a better way, there's a way we deal with companies in other parts of the country. I think there's a lot of ideas. I'd rather see all the ideas put on the table.
It sounds like a no. Is that a no?
I'm just saying, why do we predetermine? I do not want to get into a trade war. I want companies to be built in America, and I think lowering the tax incentive is the best way about doing it.
And you can see the divide right there because Republicans say they want to work with this president. They're concerned, though, about sparking a trade war. They've had similar concerns as well about that carrier deal. They wanted to save the jobs in Indiana, but are concerned that it ran against conservative principles in terms of the free market bill.
So balance that about, or rather with the message of Donald Trump, because his message resonated with a lot of people, especially in these Midwest states.
Yeah, in the Rust Belt states, also a state like North Carolina that's been hard hit by the loss of manufacturing jobs. And frankly, that's exactly why you see Donald Trump right there in North Carolina this week at one of those thank you rallies. The previous one was, of course, in your home state of Ohio. And Donald Trump is making it clear he's not backing down from these fights because he wants to stand up for workers, whether it's against conservative principles or not. Watch.
Our trade deficit. Now nearly $800 billion a year. We have a deficit, think of it, of almost $800 billion a year. You always say, who's negotiating these deals? Is a chronic drag on the growth and a destroyer of jobs and wealth in our country.
So they're going to debate back and forth. Does this 35% tariff make sense on companies that ship jobs overseas? But at the end of the day, you have a president who won in a lot of these battleground states, and that presidential power is going to help him in the first 100 days and beyond.
Thank you, Ed. Something to watch, and we shall. Ed Henry in Washington, D.C. Thanks.
So world-famous performance artist, challenging, subverting, and changing the way that we think about everything. Why the Wall Street Journal's Dan Henninger describes the president-elect as the Lady Gaga of politics.
There's a pair for you. 3 generals named for top national security jobs in the new administration. One too many or just about right? General Jack Keane will analyze this in a moment.
Is a Marine Corps 4-star general, the former commander of U.S. Central Command and NATO's Supreme Allied Commander. For transformation, this is going to be so great for us.
Donald Trump has said he intends to nominate 3 generals to his inner circle. General John Kelly to head up Homeland Security, General James Mattis for Secretary of Defense, and Lieutenant General Mike Flynn as National Security Advisor. Flynn's the only one of the 3 who does not need a Senate approval. General Jack Keane, chairman for the Institute to Study War and a Fox News military analyst, should be on that list. He is not. He's with me now. General, how are you? Good morning to you.
And good morning to you, Bill. Thank you.
What's going on here in Trump's thinking? Why is he attracted toward these men? Let's start there.
Well, first of all, I think there's some of the best athletes on the playing field that are being nominated for these positions. That's number one. Number two, when you think about what's been happening to the country the last 15 years, the United States military has been committed for war. And the reality is that being committed for war, they've gone through just a very competitive promotion process, calling out the very best. And they are at the top of their profession. So as a result of it, what he meets are people who are appealing, who are confident to him. They have proven professionals. They're dedicated to this country for so many years. And the confidence they have lacks arrogance. And, you know, when you think about the president-elect himself, Bill, I mean, he is a leader. He's successful. He's a man of conviction, and he's a straight talker. So I felt a little of this chemistry myself when I dealt with him on a couple of occasions, even though I had never met him before. So that's part of the story.
That's a very interesting answer. Is that he went to military school for a while when he was younger? Does that play into these decisions, do you think?
I don't know. I suspect it could, certainly. And I think he's always had tremendous regard for the military, and particularly what the military has done for this great country throughout the course of history. He refers to particular generals from time to time in that reference point.
Yeah,
so, yeah, I think some of that's there.
How about this, General? Is it one general too many? You've heard that from some circles already in the past 24 hours. What's your feeling on that?
Well, I don't. I mean, what is the concern? I don't understand what the concern is. I mean, are we militarizing the national security function? Is that the concern? If the concern is that these generals somehow are going to push the country toward war more than civilians would, that's nonsense. Because the fact is, and anybody can check on this, our history is we force and demand our national leaders to exhaust all the options if they listen to us before they select the military force option. And then, Bill, when that force option is selected, the generals are insisting we want to see a set of clear objectives and an end state. They'll still go to war without it, but that is what they insist on. So I don't see militarizing the national security function as being anything that's dangerous to this country. Quite the contrary.
Okay, now on the topic of ISIS, intriguing comment from the commander-in-chief. In an interview on CNN, he said the following on screen: the ability of ISIL to not just mass inside of Syria, but then to initiate major land offensives that took Mosul, for example, that was not on my intelligence radar screen. How do you interpret that last phrase, not on my intelligence radar screen? Is that a reflection on him? Is it a reflection on the intelligence community? Is it a both? When you heard that, you thought what?
Well, I don't disagree with the statement, but I profoundly disagree with everything that's behind it, and here's why. When we pulled away from Iraq politically in 2009 and then withdrew most of all of our combat forces in 2010 and then withdrew all of them by 2011, what we left the Iraqis is no intelligence that we had. We had absolutely the best fidelity when we were there on the ground. Secondly, we took away our soft counterterrorism force. So when ISIS began to emerge as a force inside of Iraq, just Iraqi fighters only, just a few hundred, they didn't see it and they didn't have the ability to kill it. We would have seen it and we would have killed it. So that never would have been a reality. The second thing that happened, because the Syrian civil war bill was stalemated in the sense that the opposition forces, we wouldn't assist them, and the Syrian Assad regime was assisted by the Russians and also significantly by the Iranians. The opposition force initially had the momentum, but got pushed back by the Iranians coming in. There was a stalemate there. We refused to help them. Baghdadi made the #1 decision of his existence and said, I could go into northeast Syria and have a safe haven and no one will contest me because they can't afford to. And he did that. And he grew those several hundred fighters in 2 years to an international force of 30,000 that invaded Iraq. Both of those realities, Iraq in 2011, Syria in 2012, were Obama policy decisions that was a catalyst for the growth of ISIS.
That's a remarkable answer. General, thank you for that. There's a lot of discussion about this comment and interpretation of it, and it's the historical record right now as we wrap up 8 years of his administration. Thank you, sir, very much. Jack Keane there in Washington, D.C.
On the same line, the editorial page editor for the Wall Street Journal, William McGurn, is Main Street columnist for the Wall Street Journal. So we have a very prestigious Wall Street Journal panel here this morning. Folks, glad to have both of you here. Thank you very much, gentlemen. So did this occur to you, late night when you started thinking, Donald Trump is a performance artist, kind of like Lady Gaga?
Yeah, late one night when I was listening to all my Lady Gaga CDs.
That's how we always picture you.
Right, exactly. Well, it jumped into my head. I mean, no, it was really Donald Trump himself trying to come to grips with these tweets he sends out. And here's a president-elect, who on Thursday appoints one of the most esteemed generals of our time, Jim Mattis, to be Secretary of Defense. 2 nights later, 12:30 in the morning, he's tweeting Alec Baldwin on Saturday Night Live. Unwatchable, terrible, preposterous.
Sad.
Sad. And then,
sad.
And then it also occurred to me when Jill Stein started her recounts, and the press is running around trying to figure out whether this is a challenge to his electoral total, and suddenly Trump's tweeting, illegal, voted for her by the millions, voted for Hillary, illegal millions. Next day he tweets that if you burn the American flag, you should be imprisoned, or maybe your citizenship should be taken away. And the press runs around like little terriers finding all the cases that say you can't do that. And he is playing with these people. And that's what a performance artist does. He is disrupting them, and he just will not let anything stay stable out there in the media.
It's fascinating, Bill. I mean, we've never seen anything like this. What do you think about?
Well, I think Dick Cheney had a similar take, Dan. He didn't use the Lady Gaga reference, but he said, look, Donald Trump tweets because it works for him. It's a way for him to bypass the media and not respond to their questions and have them respond to his. For example, on the flag, when he says people should be locked up, I mean, the press goes all crazy thinking, oh, you can't put people in jail. What he's really doing is saying to his followers, the people who dislike me are out there burning the flag and so forth. And it's very effective, I think, so far. Now, again, he's only president-elect. He's not president. The question is whether you can do this, 6 months into your administration.
Or 4 years.
Yeah, or 4 years.
People who oppose Donald Trump feel that all of this leads to something very dark, very dangerous. We've heard a lot about raising instances of hate crimes out there. There was the very covered in great deal back and forth between Kellyanne Conway and Jennifer Palmieri. So Jennifer Palmieri also wrote an editorial this morning, and she basically said, look, I know how to lose graciously, but when given the opportunity to do so at the Harvard Forum a week or so ago, she chose not to do that because she felt that it was important not to do it to her, and so she's continuing to follow up on that. And today, she published this in the Washington Post. I don't know whether the Trump campaign needed to give a platform to white supremacists to win, she writes, but the campaign clearly did, and it had the effect of empowering the white nationalist movement. Trump provided a platform by retweeting white nationalists, giving their views an audience of millions. Now, what are your thoughts on this? When you look back at some of these things that were passed along, that were retweeted, dangerous or no?
I think she's wrong. I mean, we live in a world of social media where things get retweeted all the time, and the white supremacist, white nationalists, who were truly a marginal group in American life because of the media.
You wouldn't think so, given a lot of discussion that's going on out there. You would think it was the most prominent factor of the electorate.
And that's because a lot of the mainstream media made big stories out of the fact that these tweets were out there and these people existed. And so that I think the media, to a large extent, gave them a much greater stature than they had in reality out there. And this has been conflated, Martha. Let's make no mistake. Donald Trump won because he tapped in to all these lower middle class, blue-collar workers, Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin, that the Hillary campaign overlooked. And they're now trying to suggest that Trump somehow tapped in to white people who have bad thoughts about people of color.
I saw, I think it was on The View, Bill, Whoopi Goldberg talking about how instances where Muslim people are being pushed down staircases, hate crimes that are going on, which they trace back to the election of Donald Trump and the fact that he's given people like this a voice.
Yeah, well, listen, Jennifer Palmieri had that voice. We learned from the Podesta emails of her anti-Catholic attacks and so forth. Look, I think this is part of the delusion. They want to see Russians under the bed. They want to hear dog whistles that no one else hears, and they want to find white supremacists that most Americans haven't heard of. To me, what Jennifer Palmieri did is confirm that Hillary Clinton meant it when she said that half of Donald Trump's voters were deplorables who were irredeemable. And if you have that attitude toward the voters, that they're all degenerates of some kind or another, or all racist, no wonder you lose. And I think that's the big problem. And she's not the only one.
Yeah. Bill McGurn taking us to Main Street, and Dan Henninger to Wonderland once a week. Thank you very much, gentlemen. Good to have both of you here today.
Thank you, Martha.
Just breaking right now, our own Chris Wallace confirming a moment ago the Trump transition team says Mr. Trump will interview Alan Mulally perhaps as soon as today as a possible Secretary of State. Now, he used to run Ford. He used to run Boeing. And if you remember, the Exxon CEO was also under consideration for the same job. Mitt Romney was under consideration for this same job. There's a common thread here about either business leaders or generals that Mr. Trump is attracted to, especially when it comes to the category of Secretary of State. So no announcements, just interviews, but nonetheless, they're interesting to consider and think about. So more on that in a moment. First, though, here is a